6 or 7 years into development where I started thinking, well, what's in it for me next? Where do I see myself going? I think I'm a great example of the fact that leaders can be made. There's all of these skills are completely learnable. You just need to invest time. You need to take time out from your regular duties often.
Shyam Bhat is the engineering manager at eBay Classifieds Group in Berlin. I wanted to get him on the show to basically find out how and why he rose the ranks to engineering manager. The reason is that as a recruiter, I know that if a company is looking for a lead or an engineering manager, they want that experience already. So how do you actually go about getting that experience? And what can you do as a software engineer to basically demonstrate your capability and ambitions to do the role? That's something Shyam did and something that he talks about in great detail during this episode. We go through that, but we also go through his leadership style, his learnings in engineering management, and what you can do to basically increase your chances to become an engineering manager and also thrive in the role as well. He's a super honest guy. He admits that he doesn't have all the answers and is early on in his journey, but I think that's part of the reasons why he has been such a successful manager so far. I really enjoyed speaking with him. If you're a software engineer wanting to make that jump to management or a manager already, then this is the episode for you. So, without further ado, I'm Alex Bloisey, and this is the Building Our World podcast. I know it's cliche, and I know with most podcasts, I always try and go back to the beginning, but I think that is where most people logically want to start, and most people logically want to hear your journey from, because right now you are the engineering manager at eBay, or one of the engineering managers at eBay. But not everyone who goes into software engineering rises those ranks and gets into that position. But if we take it back to the beginning, what led you to do software engineering in the first place from, say, was it a young age, and how did you eventually get into it?
Yeah, sure. Great. So if I start back from the beginning, I think it became fairly clear when I was when I was studying in school, early university, that I was really interested in technology, gadgets specifically, and yeah, the choice of getting into software engineering was pretty much a no-brainer for me, given how much time I could spend on the computer without getting tired and actually could go on. Um, there was an interesting turn somewhere after I finished university in my career where the usual route in software engineering was to, well, back in the day when I was studying, was to go into enterprise applications, Java, .NET, and that's around the time where mobile was not that big yet. Or barely getting traction. So we hadn't come to realize what mobile devices are capable of and software on it is capable of. The App Store hadn't started yet. So
Okay.
I started doing a app on the side. I was actually I did have a Mac when I started out my university, and that's actually a barrier to entry for a lot of people learning app development, iOS app development. Back then, there was no Android. So I was in a fortunate place that I could learn that. I did that as a side project, and actually took up an internship. This was completely out of the usual for someone to take up an internship in a small startup and do some app development. We didn't know where app development was heading, but looking back now, around that time, things just exploded in the mobile area. And I actually got fortunate with the little experience I had building apps. I got fortunate how many opportunities came forward, and I was able to work in really good companies building really exciting products, which I was really passionate about. So I'm really glad about that.
What was then, if there was no app store then, how did it work before then with apps? How could you go and get an app?
Right, there was the App Store. It had just about launched, but we
Okay.
didn't know the power of App Store. We didn't really
No.
know how many people would actually end up using the apps we built. The apps were pretty basic back then. You could build a few maps. So I was one of the first apps I worked on was my university app. I was just building something for students to look up information about our university on their mobile phones. Now, how many students really had an iPhone back in the day in the place I lived in India is questionable, and how many people would actually use it was questionable. It was just a project, and I didn't know where things would be heading,
So what
especially
year?
in the iPhone area.
What year was this?
This was 2009, 2010.
Oh yeah, so really early days. The iPhone was it 2007, 2008 it came out, and then takes a few years for adoption, doesn't it? So yeah,
That's
that
right.
is.
And the App Store came a bit later.
Mm. Yeah. So why didn't you go into? Because surely the logical thing and where all the jobs are would be back end engineering or front end. Did it ever cross your mind that could be a bit of a risk? Because I know in tech it can be a few decisions early on, and your experience can be obsolete quite quickly.
Yeah, true. The thing is, I was really enjoying the development I was doing on apps, and I hadn't experienced something similar in the enterprise projects I was building in university. They're of course very limited to what you get exposed to, but all of that wasn't really sounding as much fun as it is to build a app, a playful app, put it out for users to use, and actually have get to know the practical usage of how users are experiencing the software you built. And I thought this was really interesting. This is something I could connect to because I was an avid mobile phone
Mm.
user as well. Um, just something that I became really passionate about. I was really passionate about Apple technologies in general, on how sophisticated their developer tools got sophisticated eventually. Back
Yeah.
then, they were pretty bare bones, but I liked where they were going. I was really passionate about the frameworks they were building. So,
Okay. Awesome. So eventually, you obviously bed into your career and you get into the iOS world as an engineer. Um, so when you started your career and you're getting the commercial experience, did you have any idea in your mind about where you wanted to take your career? Because I know some people in software engineering, they will happily code pretty much their whole career and stay hands on. You've obviously gone down the management route and done really well there. So when you first started, did you ever think about that, about where you wanted to go? How much was that of an impact in your thoughts?
right. So I wouldn't say I was thinking too much about where I'm heading. I was really enjoying the products I was building, those the frameworks I was learning, the technologies I was picking up. There's always something new to look forward to build, to uh, get in touch with users who are using your apps. It was all exciting. I never thought really about what I'm going to do next in my career until about, I think, 6 or 7 years into development, where I started thinking, well, what's in it for me next? Where do I see myself going? So in the early years, not really. This decision didn't really have a big impact. I was just enjoying my time, and there was just so much to learn
Hmm.
that there was not a single day where I was not learning something new, building something new. So it was just a lot of excitement initially.
Okay. So then, like, what, 6, 7 years in, you're looking for new dimensions to your role. Um, how does it actually work? And I think probably a lot of software engineers listening would probably want to know this as well. From like myself, a recruiter point of view, if I'm recruiting for an engineering lead position or even like a tech lead position, they always, always, always want leadership experience. So one of probably the only ways is to get internally promoted or at least adopt some sort of leadership responsibilities in your current role as like a senior engineer.
Mhm.
Um, so how did you start to bridge that gap? Because it is a hard jump to make, especially in the job hunt side of things.
Right. Um, yeah. So one of the first things I started doing was getting to know about the role better. This was around the time when I was still not sure whether I want to go in the tech leadership direction or the management direction. So I started talking to people around me, getting to know the role better, and at some point made up my mind that this is where I want to head. And one of the first things I did was started talking to people around me and making my career goals clear to my manager, for example, to the people
Okay.
around me, and getting inputs from them on uh, how where what the concrete steps I need to take to get in that direction. So one of the things I started doing was started focusing on problem areas, and this was pretty much uh, out of interest of having a bigger impact. There was a lot of drive I remember having back then to grow into this role. So started looking at problem areas in the company. They could be, problem areas with the processes you have in the team. There could be uh, areas where you really need to jump in, and there's a need for someone, for an engineer, to look beyond the scope of tasks, delivering tasks, and rather pushing initiatives forward or topics forward, gathering a group of people together,
Hmm.
pushing a product feature forward. So one of the things I did was started looking at the first thing I did was start looking at user problems.
Okay.
And we actually remember coming up with a product feature, for example, where I thought the users, back in the day, it was, I think, around COVID time, early times of COVID, and we saw a huge decline in the amount of cars that dealers were selling out on our platform. So I started looking at those problems, and I thought I could build a really cool feature where we could feature some of the dealers who are nearby to the users on the homepage of the app. And I
Okay.
pitched this idea in a hackathon, gathered a group of engineers around me. I was surprised how much support I got, and we started building something together. I was starting to act as a product manager there, so
Okay.
really going beyond the scope of what I normally do. And there was a lot of exposure I got and learning experience in that thing. There was one small example. I started doing a few other things, generally identifying problem areas in the workflow, in the release process, for example. Again, started suggesting a few improvements, and then gathered a group of people to make improvements in the process around how we collaborate in different teams to make a app release possible, the testing steps and those. And we did make pretty much quite a bit improvements in those processes together as a group of people. But
Hmm.
I was mostly seen as the person leading these small initiatives here and there, which actually helped me build a lot of my leadership muscles, which I think is a prerequisite for this role.
Hmm.
You need to find yourselves in positions where you're leading initiatives, moving a group of people forward, and really start thinking beyond the scope of delivering features or delivering tasks that are
Hmm.
put forward in the team.
Yeah. Is that something that always came naturally to you, or do you think you've only could have done that once you've had a fair few years of experience, or did you sort of have that nous for leadership growing up or at university?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that came naturally right from the beginning. So there are times when you're really passionate about certain things and you automatically start pushing people in that
Hmm.
direction. Those things do come naturally when you're passionate about a particular problem area. But I do remember taking active steps, looking up for things to do, planning concrete actions, and actually doing those things with the view of progressing in my career.
Hmm. Okay. I think that'd be a lot of comfort to a lot of people because if I'm like a junior engineer or a junior in any industry, it's easy to look at the managers and the real senior people above them and think, they've always been like that. They were naturally inclined to look at things in a certain way and drive things forward. Um, but actually, it can be learned.
That's
Um,
absolutely true. Yes. Uh,
there's always the question, are leaders born or made? And I think they're definitely made. And
yeah. I think I'm a great example of the fact that leaders can be made. There's all of these skills are completely learnable. You just need to
mm,
invest time. You need to take time out from your regular duties often, because well, one of the biggest misconceptions I had was you need to be an expert engineer. You need to get really
Mm,
good at proficient in your art of engineering, and that's when you can look up to the next step. That's not really true. You need to take time out from your regular development activities and actually learn skills. They're completely learnable, and yeah, I would actually not say there's something that is
mm,
born or comes
yeah,
naturally.
got to zoom out.
Mhm.
You can't see the whole chessboard if you're one of the pieces.
True.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings. I learned it a few months ago, and I think I've mentioned it on another episode because I always like to bring it up. But it is so true. And zooming out on anything and seeing the bigger picture is
Mhm.
super hard when you are in cut up in the day to day.
That's true.
So when did you actually like officially make the transition to leader? When did you sort of grab your first, say, team lead role where beyond your scope of responsibilities, you were now a little more hands off, you had more responsibilities, and you were in charge of, making a team convert business needs into code?
Yeah, this was around a year ago, I think October last year, so roughly a year ago. This happened when one of our engineering managers in the team had to go on parental leave, and there was suddenly an opening, and my manager's manager reached out to me. I'd made it clear in the past. I had been talking to people about getting into this role, and that I'm working towards this role. So out of the blue, suddenly my manager's manager approached and said, "Here's an opportunity. I think it's a role. It's an interim role for 6 months. Would you like to give it a shot?" I thought it's a great experiment. It worked well for me because I got an interim position where I could give a shot at the role and see if it's really for me. Try it out,
Mm,
and then I could get back to engineering if I feel the need to be more hands-on. And for the company as well, it worked out well because they needed someone to fill the interim gap, and it gave me a good chance to prove myself. To the company that I could
mm,
actually continue working in this role. And as soon
mm.
as the manager came back from her parental leave, there was another role that opened up, and I was quickly given that position. So I was happy to continue in
Super.
this role.
So ultimately, obviously, circumstances aligned for you that worked well, but you probably wouldn't have got asked if you hadn't done that stuff when you were an engineer of going beyond the scope of your task and seeing
Yeah,
things and getting things on side. So whilst it
that's true.
may seem lucky, you create your own luck, I suppose.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call it lucky because I've been working for it for a while, and
Exactly. Yeah.
we all have this impression because engineering manager roles are fewer in the organization, so we all have an impression that these are hard to come by. But in today's world, it's actually surprising how quickly they come by. Because there was this person who went on parental leave, there was another person, another role. There was, I think, two or three roles that got open, and there's a dire need for leaders to step up and take these roles. And organizations themselves prefer engineers stepping up into these
Yeah.
positions because they have a good idea of how teams work in the organization. They share the same values. It's actually I wouldn't call it luck. It's just a matter of time. Once you keep preparing towards that, these things do come by when the time is right, and you
Yeah.
just have to be ready for those.
So when you do get that first promotion into that leadership position, Um, are you managing people that were your sort of peers at one point? And is there any sort of awkwardness or animosity in that regard? How does that work?
Yeah, true. It surely is an awkward position, but it depends on what kind of relationship you have with them. So I was in a position where I wasn't leading the direct peers that I was working with. So I had joined another team, and these I'm really thankful for the way they were. They were really supportive of me. I was honest to them that this is my first time. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I was pretty honest and transparent to them, and I let them know that you guys are the experts, and I'm going to need a lot of your help to make this happen. I'm actually pleasantly surprised looking back how much support I got from the team,
Okay.
and no one's really looking to pull you down. They're all happy as long as you are supportive of their needs as well. And if you have the right mindset of thinking about putting the team first before you, I think even if there are initial hiccups, I think over time the team finds out that you care about the team more than yourself, and
Mm.
things just fall into place naturally after that.
How have you adapted to managing people? Because whether you're in tech or any other industry, everyone's different. It's the same as like in sport. You know, each player is different. They respond differently to different stimulants, whether it's being more empathetic or being a bit more forceful. Um,
Mhm.
how have you adapted to different personalities in your team, and is that something that you've struggled with at all?
um, Yeah, true. So I have dealt with different kind of engineers with different personalities. They have their own styles of working, and I've generally found it a pattern in the company I've worked in two teams that I've been with. That I like working more with engineers who like more autonomy,
Hmm.
and yeah, I've been fortunate to work with really senior engineers who know their trade well, who are experts in their area. So I can really trust uh, them with technology decisions, and I usually don't get into those. Um, Although there's one common trend I see in working with each one of them. I think each one of them appreciates when you're honest, when you're transparent to them, when you make your expectations clear, when you give feedback on time, when you give positive feedback on time, when you give constructive feedback on time. uh, I've set myself a way of working, and I've tried it with each one of them, and it actually works. That's what there's a common pattern. They all expect that you maintain transparency, you help them grow and succeed. As long as those are your top priorities, um, you can figure out the smaller details of each one's ways
Mm.
of working, but those are really top important factors for me, and they're the same to each of the engineers. We really have to set that sort of relationship with
Okay.
each one of them.
So when you're saying about autonomy, what do you mean by that? How much responsibility are you giving your team, and in practice, what does that actually mean on the day to day?
Right. So I've been in a situation where I've come from an iOS development background, and I've been leading a team that's cross-functional, which means there's back-end engineers, front-end engineers. Uh, Now, obviously, I do not have the depth of knowledge that they have in their back-end and front-end systems. So I could try to read and gather some information, but really, they are the experts. And I've usually come to just completely delegate a lot of responsibility and decision making on the team. Um, so, and this is something I've realized that most engineers love working in this fashion. Um, that they want their space, they want their autonomy, and all I need to do really is give them enough context of the objectives, the goals we have, the missions we are working towards, and all they really need is the context. Once they have context, they do wonders in their areas. And um, yeah, I've actually adopted this style of working also with the areas where I have a strong grasp over, which is iOS, Android. I do fairly understand every little detail of what's happening,
Mm.
but because of my experience initially working with front end, back end engineers, I've adopted this style, and I also
Okay.
don't go too deep into the implementation details of the mobile technologies I work with.
Even though you probably could if you wanted to,
Yeah,
but
it
you just
just turns out to be so much more efficient when you don't get into the details and trust the team with decision making, and you also get a lot of initiative. If you're the one initiating things and going into implementation details and explaining how things should be, then people just completely lose motivation and coming up with solutions on their own. And I was actually in a fortunate position. I used my lack of knowledge on backend and front end as a weapon
yeah.
to actually understand this way of working or this style of management. And I'm really fortunate. I learned that early on during my management days. I really
Mm.
have a strong set of engineers who I can totally rely on for decision making. I also have principal engineers who I partner with very often to take their advice on technical decisions. But yeah, more or less everyone in the team has the full autonomy to take decisions.
Okay, awesome. One thing you touched on there that was interesting, and is that obviously you came over to Berlin um, from India,
That's right.
and I wanted to know as well because although Berlin's a really really international place and very much European culture, probably the epitome of the European working culture. Um, how did you find it coming in terms of the differences in working culture, management methods, things like that?
Right. Yeah, there was actually a big culture difference in the ways of working in India. So this was, of course, 7 years ago from my experience in India. So I can't say for how it is now, but the first thing I noticed is people treat time very differently, and simple things like the time you start working, the time you end working. We usually start. I was one of the people who usually started late. It wasn't very easy, let's say, to stop working early. People often hung around for pretty late in the evenings, and this is something completely opposite that I saw in Berlin or Germany, that it's pretty much looked down if you stay late at work.
Mm,
And it took me a while getting used to this, but I really have come to appreciate this culture where people start on time, stop on time. The breaks are really short, and value every minute of their work, and are very professional about it.
mm,
The other thing I noticed was there are strict hierarchies in India, and often in larger companies. I can't say about every company, but on an average, every large company has very strict hierarchies, and it's very hard to say challenge decisions made by seniors, or seniors in experience, seniors in age. This is something I experienced a lot, and this is completely different in the Western world in general, but specifically also in Germany. That everyone's got the same voice. Or even people who are older in age or more senior in experience are very accommodative and want to get challenged by
mm.
people who've just come in and want to hear opinions, and the best idea wins essentially. So it's not the case that it's always the case like that in India, but more or
Yeah.
so I've been in a culture where it wasn't easy to raise your voice against people who established themselves or senior
Mm,
positions.
mm. It's so interesting because it seems like obviously I speak to a lot of engineers from India. I know a lot of them, and have spoken to them. And there's lots of articles as well written on this subject as well. There was one I saw actually came across the other day, and it was about how the CEOs of like the main tech companies like Microsoft, Google, Twitter now as well are all from India, and one of the sort of hypotheses that they came up with is obviously why this was the case. And it was super interesting. They basically said that um, in India, if you want to get ahead, there's obviously more. There's a larger population. You have to navigate these management structures in a small minority of areas. There's corruption that you have to deal with
Mhm.
um, as well, and obviously some regions in India is further down the socio-economic ladder than others. And basically, if you make it to that sort of level, that you're equipped with like a resilience and a skill set, that if you then would go into like a Western company, you can actually navigate quite easily because it's probably less obstacles than when you were back home. It was just one article I came across. I don't know if you would agree with that or disagree with that or had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually agree with what you're saying. The playing field outside, the work environment outside is pretty even. Everyone has a fair opportunity. If you can create that value for others, if you can have that impact, there's very little factors that's going to stop you from succeeding in your career. And yeah, there is a lot of challenges you need to navigate through culturally as well,
Mm.
working in India. Uh, yeah, yeah, you need to have those relationships. So it's a highly relationship based society
Okay.
where you need to form relationships before you get work done. So if you do have good relationships with people, you often get advantages in your work areas as well. So, and if you're not actively going out and building those relationships with
Mm.
people, it becomes actually really hard for you to get too far in whatever you're trying to achieve. So, when you come out here, it's actually a fair playing field.
Mm.
And everyone who really wants to get something done, if they can only convince people that the um, uh, idea has potential, then there are people willing to
Mm.
support you with that, regardless of the relationship you might have with people.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting how different cultures can shape you and how it can actually benefit you in another culture as well from a work point of view. You've been in Berlin now for like 7 years, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. How has Berlin, since you've been there, how has Berlin itself changed? Like the city, but also like the tech ecosystem as well.
Right. Berlin's always been a super vibrant city. I always wondered when I moved here, why isn't this place more popular in the tech world, in the world in general? It offers such a fantastic lifestyle. It offers several opportunities for you to go network, for you to find really bright people, like-minded people. I think these are really exciting times. Back when I joined, um, there were fewer opportunities in Berlin as compared to what there are
Mm.
today. There were smaller startups. They were doing good stuff, a lot of good stuff, but their impact was fairly local to either Germany or Europe. And today, you see there's a lot of companies that have pretty much global impact. The talent here is at par with the best global talent around the
Oh yeah.
world. And it's also causing a lot of Silicon Valley companies to come in and look for great talent here in Germany.
Mm.
So yeah, these are exciting times. A good time to be in Berlin right now in the tech industry, and I think there's lots coming up ahead. The
Mm.
talent war right now is pretty wild,
Yeah.
but that actually it's a good thing for everyone who is working in Germany, because there's a lot of exciting opportunities coming
Yeah.
and a lot of interesting work to do where you can have a global impact.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of people have asked me they about Berlin tech and like the future, and my take is that I mean, there's been huge growth over the past few years, and it's like some people are, oh, is it just a bubble waiting to burst? And I think what's unique about Berlin is that unlike, say, Paris, Amsterdam, or even London, is that there's still so much room for growth, whether that just be like space outside or just how developed it is as a city. I mean, if you come to Berlin, you wouldn't really think it was the capital city unless you sort of walk past the Reichstag. Um, and
True.
I actually think it's probably just the start for Berlin tech as an ecosystem. It's only you got to think like the biggest companies in Berlin, like they're like only just sort of 10 or just over 10 years old, and they're
True.
mega companies. And from that, as obviously a whole ecosystem has spawned. So I think definitely this year we've seen it progress a lot, and I do think it's only going to go one way. I really think it's going to mature as an ecosystem, and as more and more companies pop up as well. Obviously, that leads to the talent war. Um, but
Mhm.
if you're a software engineer, then I suppose that's a good thing.
Yeah, true. It's actually interesting to see how far Berlin's already come in the
Mm,
last 10 years. And it already felt like this place has matured a lot in terms of
mm,
technology. But you're right, there's actually so much ahead of us right now. And there's so
mm,
much to evolve to.
mm.
Completely
Even just
agree
like
with you there.
yeah, even like the infrastructure of the city, like the new airport. things like that. It's got places like London and Paris. They've kind of topped out in terms of the levels of their infrastructure and growth. As I feel like Berlin has got a few more levels in it.
Yeah,
Um,
true. They need to ramp up their housing,
yeah,
though it's one area
yeah,
where things are not moving at the speed of which everything else is moving,
yeah.
and they really need to catch up there. It might affect talent at some point. But I also wonder how the remote world is going to shape up,
Mm,
because there's more and more people opting for remote jobs. I know a couple of friends who work for Silicon Valley companies sitting out of Berlin, and at some point they wouldn't really opt to stay inside the city. So I wonder how those things will shape up as well as
mm.
we go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I speak to people, like, yeah, if you are a software engineer in where anywhere in the world, in terms of money in your pocket, financial point of view, you could probably, if you try hard enough, work remotely for a Silicon Valley company and earn, a lot of money. I still think Berlin has its pull because people just want to, many people want to relocate for better life, for their family,
Mhm.
the government, the public, sort of the healthcare, all that sort of stuff. Sadly, in a lot of countries around the world, you don't get that sort of stability. So I think it'll always have that pull in that regard. Yeah, but people who already are in Berlin, then yeah, if they don't have a reason to stay, then they could go. They could definitely go somewhere else. But I think although the cost of living is going up, I think it's still got a decent balance of cost of living and remuneration. Um,
True.
it's interesting because when I speak to people, say in like Russia or Turkey or like Eastern Europe, they're always like, "Oh my god, Berlin is so expensive."
Mm.
And I grew up in London, so I think Berlin's really cheap. I remember when I first came to Berlin, the daily travel card for the train was like €5, as in London, it's like £30. So I always think Berlin is really cheap. But I do think, as with all cities that build up, the cost of living is going to go up.
True.
I've heard some horror stories from people viewing flats that they turn up to a flat viewing in Berlin and there's like 30 other people, and you basically have to decide on the spot whether you want it and have to have like the deposit ready and all your papers. Otherwise, forget about it. Have you had any sort of, have you had to look for apartments recently at all?
Yeah, I've actually been fortunate in that area for some reason. I've always ended up living within a 10 minutes distance of my where my office is. So yeah, Berlin's also unique in that sense compared to London or Paris, that you could actually live really close to where you work. So I agree there's a lot of competition looking for apartments, but it's a really small area that people are competing for. And that's also where a lot of companies are set up. So even if you do end up not getting through that competition, if you have to move, say, 10 minutes away from the locality, you're still not more than 30
Mhm.
minutes away from your workplace, which is a
Yeah,
big plus over a lot of other important cities in the world, especially where tech is big, the Silicon
yeah,
Valley or London or Paris. You wouldn't dream of living at a 30-minute distance from your workplace. So I think Berlin scores over there as well, despite the competition and the housing crisis.
yeah. How does it work? I mean, obviously, I'm guessing now you're pretty much remote, but in non-COVID times moving forward, are you? I suppose as a manager, it might be different. Are you like hybrid, or is it fully remote right now? Are you in the office a lot?
Yeah, we've been fully remote for the last year and a half. There were times
Okay.
when we were allowed to come to office on a voluntary basis for those who want to. But and we also have these flexible policies in place at work where every team is free to choose after the pandemic. Every team is free to choose the way they want to work in,
That's a
but
good idea.
we didn't really even end up having discussions around those, because it's pretty clear to us, at least inside our team, that this is the way going forward. We'll end up working remotely and maybe coming meeting once a week or so. But that's the feeling I get from everyone, that this going to be the way going forward. We're going to end up working remotely,
Yeah,
at least in the foreseeable future.
yeah. It's a tough one because I think a lot of people would prefer pretty much all remote, apart from maybe one day a week or just for a few meetings, than completely fully remote. So just to have that just slight touch point of face to face, I think a lot of people actually want that.
Yeah, true.
Um, but the the days of lots of days a week in the office, I think, are just over.
Agree.
Awesome. So I know we will wrap up soon. I've been rabbiting on, but one thing I did want to ask you before we finished up, and it's mainly just for like software engineers, really, or I suppose anyone trying to kick on in their career. Um, so, for example, I'm a software engineer, and I do have ambitions for engineering management and to really move up the ranks in that way. What sort of one or two bits of advice would you give them?
Yeah, the top things that come to my mind are, I'd say start actively taking out time from your existing duties to understand the role, to work towards these things, because they are often different from what you're currently doing. The skill sets you need to develop are often different than what you're doing on the job. uh, Take some time to do mentorship, actively mentor junior engineers, build some mentorship skills, uh, be in close touch with people around you, try to help them, try to identify specific problem areas where your team manager or your company could use a lot of help. It doesn't have to be a part of your role. There's actually plenty of things you could initiate and push forward without being in formal authority. And there's a dire need for someone to come and step in and do these things. So, any responsibilities you think you could, or any problems you could solve, moving a group of people forward, will be actually highly appreciated and encouraged in the organization. And start actively speaking to people and asking for mentorship. One thing I wish I knew sooner was your managers actually, it's in his or her direct interest to support your growth. And the sooner you come out and speak to your manager about and make your career goals clear, the sooner you'll start getting more support. It doesn't have to be your manager, it can be any mentor you see, either in your organization or outside in your network. But really start speaking to people, understanding more about the role, and actively start taking time out towards these things. Otherwise, it's easy to get in the routine and keep
Yeah,
doing what you're doing for really long.
yeah. Absolutely. No, that would be honestly super valuable for aspiring engineering managers out there who are listening. But what about you? What does the future look like for you in terms of your career path? Do you think much about the future and what you want to achieve?
Yeah, I haven't thought of a lot of concrete things I want to be doing. There's a lot for me to learn. I'm just getting started in this role, and there's so much for me to learn. In general, I think my goal, or my foresight ahead, would be to just increase my scope of influence, scope of value that I create in the company. I want to create more and more value to people I work with.
Mm,
I want to increase my scope of influence and the impact I can make in the organization. And yeah, that's it. As long as I'm doing that, um, it's good. As long as I'm working towards these things, I'm going to be happy.
super. Being happy is what it's all about. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights. It's super valuable. And I know sometimes when you know something, you think, "Oh, why am I even saying this? It's so obvious," but it's not. It's super valuable for any people who want to be in your position one day, or anyone just interested in knowing what it's like to be at that management level in the tech world. So, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for listening to the Building Our World podcast. Every view, stream, and download is massively appreciated. If you're new here, then please go back through the catalogue. There's some great gems from some of the brightest and the best in Berlin tech. And if you really like what you hear, then please do hit that follow and subscribe button. That's it for now, but until next time, goodbye.